Get your filthy hands off that display before I call the police. Joseph Owen's voice sliced through the hushed elegance of elite hours, turning every head in the boutique. 10 years managing luxury retail, a spotless record, untouchable. He stood over Franklin Jackson like a predator cornering prey. You, in the rags, step away from the watches. Franklin looked up slowly. Mid-40s, calm, dressed in clothes that looked salvaged from a dumpster. Look at this, Joseph announced to the room, his voice dripping with contempt. A homeless man in a store where the cheapest item costs more than most people make in a month. He gestured dramatically at Franklin's torn hoodie and scuffed boots. What's the plan here? Grab something shiny and run? Or are you just casing the place for your friends? He moved closer, blocking Franklin's path to the door. The wealthy clientele watched, some uncomfortable, others nodding in agreement. Joseph picked up his phone. I'm going to do what should have been done the moment you walked through that door. Security is coming. The police are coming. And you're going to learn that there are consequences for people like you wandering into places you don't belong. Franklin said nothing. He simply looked at Joseph, really looked at him, with an expression that was unnervingly calm. What Joseph did next would destroy everything. His career, his freedom, his smug certainty that he could judge a man's worth by the condition of his clothes. If you're ready to hear the whole story, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Franklin Jackson stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, watching the city wake up 47 stories below. The sunrise painted the skyline in shades of gold and amber, but he wasn't admiring the view. He was studying the people. Tiny figures hurrying along sidewalks, each one convinced they knew how the world worked, who mattered and who didn't. On the marble counter behind him sat two versions of himself. On the left, a Tom Ford suit, freshly pressed, still in its garment bag. Italian leather shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. A Patek Philippe watch that could buy a house. The uniform of Franklin Jackson, billionaire, philanthropist, the man whose face appeared on magazine covers and whose donations opened hospital wings. On the right, a pile of carefully selected rags. A hoodie with a torn sleeve and mysterious stains. Jeans worn through at the knees, not from fashion, but from genuine use, purchased from a thrift store in Brooklyn. Boots he'd deliberately scuffed and dirtied, their soles separating from the leather. The uniform of nobody, the invisible man, the person society had trained itself not to see. He reached for the rags. 6 months ago, Franklin had acquired elite hours and 12 other luxury retail locations for $340 million. Not because he needed more money, his hedge fund generated that in a quarter, but because he'd made a promise to his mother. Helen Jackson had cleaned floors in stores like these for 30 years, enduring the suspicious glares, the whispered comments, the casual cruelty of people who measured human worth in credit scores and zip codes. She'd died never having been treated with dignity in the places she'd kept spotless. Find the good ones, she'd told him in the hospital, her voice barely a whisper. The ones who see people, not price tags. They're rare, baby, but they exist. You find them, and you lift them up. So Franklin had developed his test. He called it stress testing, though his legal team had other names for it, most of them accompanied by liability warnings he ignored. He would enter his own properties in disguise, dressed as the people his managers most wanted to exclude, and watch how they responded. Watch who showed kindness when there was nothing to gain. Watch who revealed their true character when they thought no one important was looking. Elite Hours was acquisition number 13. He'd visited the previous 12 locations over the past 5 months. He'd been escorted out of 7, ignored in 3, insulted in 9. At 2 locations, managers had called the police before he'd even touched anything. He'd fired 31 people. He'd promoted 4. And he was still searching for the one person worthy of the real prize. Leadership of his entire retail division and a $2 million signing bonus that would change their life forever. Someone who understood that dignity wasn't a luxury item, that respect didn't require a receipt. Franklin pulled on the torn hoodie, catching his reflection in the window. The transformation was remarkable. Billionaire Franklin disappeared. In his place stood exactly the kind of man that Joseph Owen and countless others like him had been trained to fear, to suspect, to remove. His phone buzzed. A text from his attorney. Reminder that recording laws require 2-party consent. Also, please don't get arrested again. The bail bondsman knows you by name now. Franklin smiled and pocketed a small device that definitely wasn't recording anything, because his lawyer had definitely told him not to. Then he took one last look at the sunrise, grabbed a worn backpack that contained nothing but empty water bottles and old newspapers, and headed for the private elevator. Elite Hours opened at 9 a.m. He'd be there at 8:45, right when the staff arrived, right when they thought no one important was watching. Franklin pushed through the brass-framed doors of Elite Hours at exactly 8:47 a.m., triggering a soft chime that seemed absurdly delicate for a store built on excess. The morning light filtered through crystal chandeliers, casting prismatic shadows across display cases filled with watches that cost more than most people earned in a year. The store was a temple to wealth, all marble floors and gold accents, with glass shelves showcasing handbags, jewelry, and timepieces arranged like museum artifacts. Everything gleamed. Everything whispered exclusivity. 3 staff members clustered near the back counter, preparing for the day's business. Franklin recognized the hierarchy immediately. He'd built enough companies to read the body language of power. The man in the center, in mid-40s with silver temples and a tailored suit that probably cost $5,000, stood with the posture of someone who believed his authority was absolute. Joseph Owen, according to the file Franklin had memorized. Store manager for a decade, impressive sales numbers, 0 HR complaints on record. The lack of complaints bothered Franklin most. Beside Joseph stood 2 other employees, a young man, barely 20, with nervous energy and eyes that kept darting to the manager for approval, and a young woman, with her hair pulled back in a neat bun, adjusting the displays with careful precision. Franklin drifted toward a corner, near a rack of leather goods, and became invisible. It was a skill he'd perfected over months of these experiments. How to occupy space without demanding attention, seeing how to move like someone who expected to be ignored. He picked up his backpack, rummaged through it slowly, and watched. "Sarah, are you incompetent or just lazy?" Joseph's voice carried across the empty store, sharp enough to make the young man flinch. The woman, Sarah, looked up from the watch display she'd been arranging. "I'm sorry? These watches. Look at them." Joseph strode over, his Italian shoes clicking against marble. "The Cartier is facing the wrong direction. The Rolex should be front and center, not pushed to the side. Do you know how much revenue we lose when customers can't immediately see our premium pieces?" I was following the visual merchandising guide from corporate. I don't care about some manual written by people who've never worked a sales floor. Joseph picked up the Cartier, a delicate piece with a diamond-studded face, and thrust it toward her. This is a $50,000 watch. It demands attention. It demands respect. Things you clearly don't understand. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she nodded. I'll rearrange it. You'll do more than that. The entire case needs to be redone before we open. Joseph checked his own watch, a gesture Franklin recognized as pure theater. You have 11 minutes. And Sarah? If I have to correct you again today, we'll be having a very different conversation about your future here. The young male employee started to step forward, maybe to help, but Joseph's glare stopped him cold. Marcus, this isn't a team project. Sarah can handle basic tasks on her own. Can't you, Sarah? Yes, sir. Franklin watched Sarah's hands as she began removing watches from the display case, working with swift efficiency despite the impossible timeline. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from incompetence but from controlled anger. He recognized that tremor. He'd felt it himself years ago before the money, when bosses like Joseph had treated him as expendable. Joseph turned away, dismissing her, and that's when he noticed Franklin for the first time. His expression shifted instantly, from managerial superiority to something colder, suspicious, predatory. Their eyes met across the showroom floor. Franklin didn't look away. He just stood there in his rags, looking exactly like Joseph's worst nightmare. The manager's face hardened. He started walking toward Franklin, purpose in every step. Sarah glanced up from her work, saw what was about to happen, and her face filled with quiet dread. Excuse me. Joseph's voice cut through the boutique's refined atmosphere like a knife through silk. Sir, I need you to step away from the merchandise. Franklin looked up slowly, his expression neutral. Around them, the first customers of the day had begun filtering in. A woman in Chanel examining scarves, 2 men in business suits browsing cufflinks, an elderly couple near the jewelry counter. All of them turned to watch. I'm not touching anything, Franklin said quietly. Your presence is touching everything. Joseph moved closer, positioning himself between Franklin and the door. This is a luxury establishment. We have a dress code. We have standards. Marcus, the young male employee, shifted uncomfortably near the register. Sarah had frozen mid-task, a watch still in her hand, her eyes darting between Franklin and Joseph with obvious concern. I'm just looking, Franklin said, his tone still even. The store's open to the public, isn't it? The store is open to customers. Joseph's smile was thin and sharp. People who can afford to shop here. People who understand the value of what we offer. You don't exactly fit that description, do you? A few of the customers murmured in agreement. The woman in Chanel nodded approvingly. Franklin could feel the weight of their judgment, the collective decision being made about who belonged and who didn't. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the reveal of true character when people thought they were safe in their assumptions. Joseph turned to address his audience, his voice rising with performative concern. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption. We occasionally have individuals wander in who don't understand the nature of our business. I'll have this resolved shortly. He pulled out his phone, but before he could dial, Sarah's voice cut through the tension. Mr. Owen, the Cartier, it's missing. Every head swiveled toward her. Sarah stood at the watch display, her face pale, staring down at the velvet tray where she'd been rearranging timepieces. A vacant indent remained where a watch should have been. Joseph's expression transformed. The theatrical manager disappeared, replaced by something calculating and cold. He walked over to Sarah with measured steps, examined the display, then turned back to Franklin with barely contained satisfaction. "The Cartier Santos," Joseph announced to the room. $50,000, diamond-studded face. And it was there 10 minutes ago when we opened. He let the implication hang in the air like poison gas. Franklin didn't move. He just watched Joseph's performance with the same calm attention he'd give to a quarterly earnings report. "I didn't take your watch," Franklin said. "Of course you didn't." Joseph's voice dripped with sarcasm. "You just happened to be standing near luxury goods with your hands in your backpack, and a $50,000 watch just happened to disappear. What an unfortunate coincidence." The customers had formed a loose semicircle now, blocking the exit. The elderly man pulled his wife closer, as if poverty might be contagious. The businessmen crossed their arms, suddenly deputized as unofficial security. "Check the cameras," Franklin suggested. "Oh, I will, after the police arrive." Joseph pulled out his phone again, but this time he completed the call. "Yes, I need officers at elite hours on 5th Avenue. We have a theft in progress and the suspect is attempting to leave." He paused, eyes locked on Franklin. "Yes, he's still here. We're detaining him." Marcus stepped forward hesitantly. "Mr. Owen, shouldn't we just—" "Not now, Marcus." Joseph's tone brooked no argument. He moved closer to Franklin, close enough that his expensive cologne mixed with the implicit threat. "You're not going anywhere until the police sort this out, and I'm sure they'll be very interested in what they find when they search you." Sarah set down the watch she'd been holding with trembling hands. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it, her face a mask of conflicted emotions. Franklin met Joseph's eyes and saw exactly what he'd expected to see. Not righteous anger, but opportunity. The predator's excitement at finding easy prey. "Call them," Franklin said softly. "I'll wait." The 12 minutes waiting for the police felt like an hour. More customers had wandered in, drawn by the commotion like spectators to an accident. Word spread quickly in the boutique. There'd been a theft. The suspect was being detained. Watch the homeless man by the leather goods. Franklin stood exactly where Joseph had positioned him, still as a statue, while the manager paced around him like a shark circling prey. "Empty your pockets," Joseph demanded suddenly. "All of them. Now." Franklin looked at him with that same unsettling calm. "I thought you wanted to wait for the police." "I'm the manager of this establishment. I have every right to protect our merchandise." Joseph's voice rose, playing to the crowd. "Unless you have something to hide?" The woman in Chanel pulled out her phone, angling for a video. One of the businessmen nodded approvingly. "Let him search you," he called out. "You've got nothing to worry about if you're innocent." Franklin slowly reached into his torn jeans and pulled out the contents of his pockets. A crumpled receipt from a bodega. 73 cents in change. A Metro card. He laid them on the nearest display counter with deliberate care. "The backpack," Joseph said. "Open it." Franklin unzipped the worn bag and upended it. Empty plastic water bottles tumbled out, along with newspapers weeks old, a crushed granola bar wrapper, and a pair of fingerless gloves. The detritus of homelessness, carefully curated. Joseph kicked through the items with his expensive shoe, his lip curled in disgust. The crowd murmured. Some looked vindicated, others uncomfortable with the spectacle they were witnessing. "Nothing," one customer muttered. "Maybe he stashed it somewhere." Or swallowed it, another suggested. Joseph's eyes lit up at the suggestion. Take off your hoodie. Excuse me? You heard me, the hoodie, now. Joseph stepped closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper only Franklin could hear. You thought you could walk into my store looking like garbage and I'd just let it slide? You're going to learn what happens to people who don't know their place. Franklin met his eyes and saw the truth behind the performance. This wasn't about a missing watch. This was about power, about humiliation, about putting someone Joseph deemed inferior in what he considered their proper position. Beneath him. Slowly, Franklin pulled off his hoodie. Beneath it, he wore a threadbare t-shirt with holes near the collar. His arms were muscular but thin, the physique of someone who might have missed too many meals. Another careful detail. Turn around, Joseph ordered. Arms out. Franklin complied. Joseph patted him down roughly, his hands aggressive and invasive, checking every pocket, every seam, running his fingers along Franklin's waistband. The search was unnecessarily thorough, designed to degrade rather than investigate. Sarah turned away, unable to watch. Marcus stared at his shoes. The customers watched with a mixture of fascination and discomfort, their phones out, documenting everything. Check his shoes, the elderly man suggested. I saw a documentary once. Joseph didn't need encouragement. Sit down, take them off. Franklin lowered himself to the marble floor. The cold seeped through his thin jeans. He unlaced his boots with steady hands and set them aside. Joseph grabbed them, shaking them roughly, checking inside, peeling back the insoles. Nothing. Socks, too. Franklin peeled off his socks, revealing feet that bore the realistic calluses and wear of someone who walked the city streets daily. Another detail he'd gotten right. Joseph stood over him, frustration creeping into his theatrical confidence. The watch wasn't on Franklin's body. It wasn't in his bag. The physical evidence refused to cooperate with his narrative. He must have passed it to someone, Joseph announced to the crowd, or hidden it before we noticed it was missing. Franklin pulled his socks back on, his movements unhurried. Or maybe, he said quietly, the watch was never stolen at all. Joseph's face flushed red. Are you calling me a liar? I'm saying maybe you should check your inventory more carefully before you publicly humiliate someone. The sirens outside cut through the tension like a blade. 2 police cruisers pulled up to the curb, visible through the boutique's glass facade. Joseph's smile returned, sharp and triumphant. We'll see what the police have to say about your theories. The police officers entered elite hours with the practiced neutrality of people who'd responded to too many calls from upscale establishments about suspicious individuals. Officer Chen was younger, mid-30s, with observant eyes that swept the room cataloging faces and positions. Officer Rodriguez was older, built like someone who'd walked beats for decades, and he looked tired before the conversation even started. Someone want to tell me what's going on? Rodriguez said. Joseph stepped forward immediately, his posture shifting to respectful citizen assisting law enforcement. Officers, thank you for coming so quickly. I'm Joseph Owen, manager of this store. We've had a theft. A Cartier Santos watch, valued at $50,000, went missing approximately 20 minutes ago. He gestured toward Franklin, who was now standing again, pulling his hoodie back on. This individual entered the store shortly before the watch disappeared. He was observed near the display case, acting suspiciously. Chen pulled out a notebook. Acting suspiciously how? Lurking, keeping his hands in his bag, refusing to engage with staff. Joseph's voice carried across the showroom. When we discovered the watch was missing, I detained him and conducted a preliminary search. The watch wasn't on his person, but I believe he may have concealed it somewhere else in the store, or passed it to an accomplice. Franklin watched Joseph perform, noting every gesture, every calculated pause for emphasis. The manager was good at this. He'd probably handled incidents before, knew exactly how to frame the narrative to get the response he wanted. "Did you see him take the watch?" Rodriguez asked. "I saw him near the display case. Sarah, my employee, discovered it was missing shortly after." Joseph turned to Sarah. "Tell them what you told me." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "The watch was there when I started rearranging the display. Then it wasn't. And this gentleman was the only non-staff person near the case?" Chen asked. "The only one who looks like he needs to steal," one of the businessmen interjected. Several customers nodded. Franklin remained silent, his eyes tracking Joseph's movements. The manager was energized now, feeding off the crowd's support, enjoying his authority. He paced near the watch display, gesturing as he reconstructed his version of events for the officers. "I've managed this store for 10 years, Joseph said. "I know our clientele, I know our inventory, and I know when something doesn't belong." He moved closer to the display case, his hand resting on the glass surface near where Sarah stood. The watch was in this exact position, and now, that's when Franklin saw it. Joseph's hand, as he gestured emphatically to the officers, swept across the display counter where Sarah had set down several watches during her rearranging. His fingers moved with practiced ease, palming something from behind a velvet watch stand. The movement was smooth, almost invisible, the kind of sleight of hand that required practice. Then Joseph's hand dropped to his blazer pocket, adjusting his jacket in what looked like a casual gesture. The entire sequence took perhaps 3 seconds. No one else noticed. They were all watching Franklin, waiting for the homeless man to be led away in handcuffs, waiting for their assumptions to be validated. But Franklin had spent 3 decades reading markets, reading people, reading the tiny tells that separated truth from deception. He'd just watched Joseph Owen pocket the stolen watch. Franklin's mind raced through the implications. This wasn't an opportunistic frame-up. Joseph had planned this. He'd probably taken the watch himself earlier, hidden it, then discovered it was missing after Franklin entered the store. The perfect crime. Blame the obvious suspect. The man no one would believe. The person whose word meant nothing against a respected manager's testimony. "Sir," Rodriguez said, addressing Franklin, "do you consent to a more thorough search?" Franklin kept his eyes on Joseph, who met his gaze with barely concealed satisfaction. The manager's hand rested casually in his blazer pocket now, fingers wrapped around $50,000 in stolen merchandise. "Actually," Franklin said calmly, "I have a better idea." Officer Rodriguez crossed his arms, his expression suggesting he'd heard every better idea imaginable from people trying to avoid searches. "Sir, this will go a lot smoother if you just cooperate." "I am cooperating," Franklin said. "I'm suggesting you search everyone who had access to that display case, including the manager." The boutique went silent. Even the ambient music seemed to fade into the background. Joseph's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then righteous indignation in the span of 2 seconds. "Excuse me?" Joseph's voice pitched higher. "Are you seriously suggesting that I stole from my own store?" I'm suggesting the watch could be anywhere, Franklin said evenly. If we're being thorough. Joseph turned to the officers, his hands spread in a gesture of bewildered innocence. Officers, this is exactly what they do. They try to confuse the situation, create chaos, turn it around on the victim. I've seen it a dozen times. He laughed, but there was an edge to it. I'm the manager. I have access to everything here. Why would I steal a watch I could literally take home any night? Why would I steal a watch I couldn't possibly sell? Franklin countered. A $50,000 Cartier has serial numbers, documentation, probably GPS tracking. Where exactly would a homeless man fence that? Chen glanced at Rodriguez, and something unspoken passed between them. Franklin recognized that look, the first crack in certainty, the recognition that the narrative wasn't as simple as it appeared. He's trying to deflect, Joseph insisted, his voice rising. This is a tactic. Officers, I called you here in good faith. I'm the victim of a crime. My store has lost $50,000 in merchandise, and instead of doing your job, you're letting him manipulate the situation. We're just trying to understand what happened, Rodriguez said carefully. What happened is obvious. Joseph's composure was fracturing now, anger seeping through the cracks. A homeless man walks into a luxury boutique. A watch goes missing. It's not complicated. It's not a mystery. He pointed at Franklin. He took it. He hid it. And now he's trying to avoid the consequences by accusing me. The woman in Chanel nodded vigorously. I saw him near the display case. I didn't see the manager anywhere near it. I was arranging watches there all morning, Sarah said quietly. All eyes turned to her. She looked terrified but continued. Mr. Owen was helping me. He was touching the displays too, showing me how he wanted them arranged. Joseph shot her a look that could have melted steel. Sarah, I was supervising your work. That's my job. I'm just saying he was near the case too, Sarah said, her voice barely audible. If we're searching everyone who touched it. Are you seriously taking his side? Joseph's voice cracked with genuine disbelief. You work for me, Sarah. This man is a stranger who walked in off the street looking like he crawled out of a dumpster. And you're defending him? I'm not defending anyone, Sarah said, but her hands were shaking. I'm just trying to tell the truth. Joseph turned back to the officers, his face flushed. This is unbelievable. I called the police to report a theft, and now I'm being treated like a suspect in my own store. Do you know how many tax dollars I pay? How much this store contributes to this neighborhood? His voice climbed higher. I'm the victim here. Me, my business. And you're letting this con artist manipulate you. Sir, no one's accusing you of anything, Chen said. Then do your job and arrest him. Joseph's composure shattered completely. Search him again. Get a warrant. Get dogs. I don't care. But get him out of my store. Franklin remained perfectly still, his eyes never leaving Joseph's right pocket. Franklin let the silence stretch for 3 seconds, watching Joseph's face cycle through shades of red. The manager's right hand had moved instinctively to his blazer pocket during his outburst, a protective gesture he probably didn't realize he'd made. It was the kind of tell that separated amateurs from professionals in any high-stakes negotiation. Officer Rodriguez, Franklin said, his voice cutting through the tension with unnerving calm. Before you search me again, I'd like you to check Mr. Owen's right blazer pocket. The boutique erupted. Customers gasped. Joseph's face went from red to white in an instant. Marcus's mouth fell open. Sarah's eyes widened, her hand moving to cover her lips. "That's it!" Joseph shouted. "That's defamation! That's slander! Officers, I want him arrested right now! Not just for theft, for making false accusations against me in front of witnesses." But Rodriguez and Chen had both noticed what Franklin noticed. Joseph's hand had moved protectively to his pocket the moment Franklin spoke. It was an involuntary response, the body betraying what the mind tried to hide. "Sir," Rodriguez said to Joseph, his tone shifting to something more formal, "would you consent to a voluntary search?" "Absolutely not." Joseph's voice shook with fury. "This is harassment. I'm the one who called you. I'm the victim of a crime. And now you're treating me like a criminal because some homeless con artist made a wild accusation?" "It's a simple request," Chen said. "If there's nothing in your pocket, this gets cleared up immediately. I don't have to prove my innocence. That's not how this works." Joseph looked around wildly at the customers, searching for support. "You all saw him near the display. You all know what happened here. Tell them." The woman in Chanel lowered her phone slightly. Her expression had shifted from righteous certainty to something more uncertain. The businessmen exchanged glances. The elderly couple took a step back. "Mr. Owen," Rodriguez said, his voice taking on the patient tone of someone who'd had this conversation before. "You understand how this looks, right? You're refusing a simple search that would immediately prove you're innocent." "I shouldn't have to prove anything." Joseph's voice cracked. "I have rights. This is my store. My reputation is impeccable. 10 years without a single incident. And you're going to take the word of—" He gestured wildly at Franklin. "This nobody over mine?" "We're not taking anyone's word," Chen said. "We're investigating. That's our job." Franklin remained motionless, a statue in rags. He could see the calculation happening behind Joseph's eyes, the desperate math of someone trapped in a corner. Refuse the search and look guilty. Submit to the search and be exposed. There was no good option left. "Fine," Joseph said suddenly. "You want to humiliate me? Go ahead, search me. When you find nothing, I'm filing a complaint against both of you for harassment, and I'm pressing charges against him for false accusation and attempted defamation." He pulled out his pockets dramatically, turning them inside out. His left pocket contained his keys and a money clip. He made a show of it, she holding them up for everyone to see. "Satisfied?" Joseph said. "Now the right—" But his hand had frozen at his right pocket, his fingers touching the fabric. Something in his expression changed. The color drained from his face completely. "Mr. Owen?" Rodriguez stepped closer. "Your right pocket, please." Joseph's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His hand remained at his pocket, trembling now, unable to complete the motion. "Sir, I need you to empty that pocket right now." The room held its breath. Sarah's hands were clasped together like she was praying. Marcus had backed against the wall. The customers pressed closer, phones raised, capturing every moment. Slowly, with a hand that shook visibly, Joseph reached into his right blazer pocket and withdrew a watch. The crystal caught the boutique's elegant lighting, casting rainbow prisms across his pale face. The Cartier Santos. $50,000. Diamond-studded face gleaming. The watch hung in Joseph's trembling fingers like an accusation made solid. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The boutique had become a photograph, everyone frozen in the moment before the world reorganized itself around a new and terrible truth. Joseph's voice cracked. "This isn't... Someone put this in my pocket. He must have, when I wasn't looking..." Sir, you're going to need to come with us, Rodriguez said, his tone now purely professional. Chen had already moved to Joseph's side, one hand resting near his belt. No, you don't understand. Joseph's eyes were wild now, darting around the room for support that no longer existed. He planted it. When I searched him, or during the confusion, this is a setup. I would never. The woman in Chanel had lowered her phone completely, her face a mixture of shock and embarrassment. The businessmen were backing toward the door. The elderly couple had already left. Everyone who'd been so certain minutes ago now looked eager to forget they'd been part of this. You have the right to remain silent, Chen began, but Joseph wasn't listening. I'm the manager. His voice pitched toward hysteria. I've worked here for 10 years. 10 years. And you're going to believe him? Look at him. He's nobody. That's when Franklin's phone rang. The sound cut through Joseph's breakdown like a bell. Not the ringtone of a burner phone or a free government device. A distinctive chime that came from a phone that cost more than the watch Joseph was still holding. Franklin reached into an inner pocket of his torn hoodie, a pocket no one had thought to check because it was hidden in the lining, and pulled out a phone encased in midnight black titanium. He answered it on speaker. Franklin Jackson speaking. The voice that filled the boutique was crisp, professional, with the kind of authority that came from corner offices and board meetings. Mr. Jackson, this is Robert Chen from your legal team. I just received an alert from your security detail. Is everything all right at the Elite Hours location? The room's atmosphere shifted like air pressure dropping before a storm. Sarah's eyes went wide. Marcus grabbed the edge of the counter for support. Joseph's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then a terrible dawning understanding. Everything's fine, Robert, Franklin said calmly. Just conducting our standard evaluation, though I think we're going to need HR on standby. Of course, sir. Should I have Ellen prepare termination paperwork? That would be helpful. Also, could you confirm my identity for the officers present? NYPD, badge numbers? Franklin glanced at Rodriguez and Chen, who both looked like they'd stepped into an alternate dimension. They provided their badge numbers in voices that had gone oddly formal. There was the sound of typing. Officers, this is Robert Chen, Senior Legal Counsel for Jackson Holdings Group. You're speaking with Franklin Jackson, majority shareholder and CEO. He acquired Elite Hours and 12 other luxury retail locations 6 months ago. I can provide documentation if needed, but his identity can be confirmed through the regional director, Ellen Torres, or the building's security footage, which will show him entering the private penthouse elevator this morning. Rodriguez and Chen exchanged a look that contained entire conversations. They'd been in law enforcement long enough to recognize when a situation had just become exponentially more complicated. Joseph made a sound like a drowning man gasping for air. The Cartier watch slipped from his fingers and hit the marble floor with a crack that seemed impossibly loud. He stared at Franklin as if seeing him for the first time. Not a homeless man, not a vagrant, not an easy target, but the person who owned everything around him, including his future. Mr. Owen, Franklin said quietly, ending the call and pocketing his phone. You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out once the officers are finished with you. Joseph's knees gave out. He caught himself on the display case, the same case where he'd committed his crime. Officer Chen snapped the handcuffs onto Joseph's wrists with mechanical precision, the metallic click echoing through the silent boutique. Joseph didn't resist. He didn't speak. He simply stared at Franklin with the hollow eyes of someone watching their entire world collapse in real time. Joseph Owen, You're under arrest for filing a false police report, attempted theft, and attempted fraud," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the weight of procedure. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The Miranda rights became background noise as Rodriguez led Joseph toward the door. Customers parted like water, phones still raised but no longer certain what story they were capturing. The confident manager who'd humiliated a homeless man minutes ago now shuffled past in handcuffs, his $5,000 suit looking absurd against the reality of his situation. As Joseph reached the door, he turned back one last time. "You set me up," he said, his voice hoarse. "This whole thing was a setup." Franklin met his eyes with that same unsettling calm. "I gave you a choice. Every person who walks through that door is making choices about who deserves dignity and who doesn't. You chose to see a person in rags and assume they were worthless. You chose to frame them for a crime to advance your own narrative. Those were your choices, Mr. Owen. I just gave you the opportunity to make them." Rodriguez guided Joseph out into the morning sunlight, where a growing crowd of sidewalk spectators watched with their phones raised. The door closed behind them, and the boutique seemed to exhale collectively. Franklin turned to the remaining staff and customers. Marcus stood frozen by the register, his face pale. The few customers who'd stayed looked deeply uncomfortable, probably reviewing their own earlier comments and hoping they hadn't been too loud. "Everyone who doesn't work here can leave," Franklin said simply. "The store is closed for the rest of the day." They left quickly, filing out in embarrassed silence. The woman in Chanel paused at the door as if to say something, then thought better of it and disappeared into the city. Then there were three: Franklin, Marcus, and Sarah. Sarah stood by the watch display, her hands still shaking, tears streaming down her face in silent rivulets. She wasn't looking at Franklin. She was staring at the space where Joseph had stood, where her boss of 3 years had just been arrested for trying to frame an innocent man. "Sarah," Franklin said gently. She looked up, her eyes red. "I should have said something sooner. When he was searching you, when he was accusing you, I knew something was wrong, but I was scared. I'm so sorry." "You spoke up when it mattered," Franklin said. He walked over to the display case and carefully picked up the Cartier watch from where it had fallen. The crystal had a small crack now, a $50,000 timepiece damaged in the service of a cheap con. "You told the truth, even though it could have cost you your job. That takes courage." "I almost didn't," Sarah whispered. "But you did." Franklin set the watch down and pulled out his phone again, making a quick call. "Ellen? I need you at elite hours. Yes, now. Bring the contracts we discussed. The succession package." He ended the call and looked at Sarah properly for the first time. She was young, maybe 23 or 24, with intelligent eyes that had learned to stay cautious in an industry that valued appearance over character. "How long have you worked here?" Franklin asked. 14 months. This is my first retail job after college." "What did you study?" "Business management and psychology. I wanted to understand people, how they make decisions, what motivates them." She laughed bitterly. "I guess I learned more about that today than in 4 years of classes." Franklin smiled. "What you learned today is exactly what I've been looking for." He gestured to the store around them. The crystal chandeliers, the marble floors, the displays of luxury goods that represented the aspirational dreams of millions. "This boutique is just the beginning. I own 12 retail locations currently, with plans to expand to 30 within 2 years. I need someone to lead that expansion. Someone who understands that our real product isn't watches or handbags. It's dignity. The way we make people feel when they walk through our doors. Sarah's eyes widened. I don't understand. I'm offering you a position as Regional Director of Customer Experience, Franklin said. Starting salary of $200,000 plus performance bonuses. But more importantly, he paused, watching her face. I'm offering you a $2 million signing bonus, paid up front, no strings, no clawbacks, money that's yours to invest, to save, to build whatever life you want. The color drained from Sarah's face. She grabbed the counter for support. That can't be real. It's very real. My lawyer is bringing the contracts now. You'll have time to review them. Have your own attorney look them over. But Sarah, I spent 6 months visiting my properties in disguise, watching how people treat those they think don't matter. I've fired 31 people. I've promoted 4. And I've been searching for someone worthy of leading my vision forward. He met her eyes. You showed kindness when there was nothing to gain. You told the truth when it could have cost you everything. That's the foundation of the culture I want to build. Sarah's hands were covering her mouth, tears flowing freely now, but different tears, the kind that came from hope rather than fear. $2 million, she whispered through her fingers. I have student loans, my mom's medical bills. I've been living with 3 roommates in Queens. Not anymore, Franklin said gently. This is what character earns, Sarah. Not cruelty. Not prejudice. Character. Marcus finally found his voice from across the room. Mr. Jackson? What about me? Franklin turned to him. The young man looked terrified, probably reviewing every moment of the morning, every time he'd stayed silent while Joseph bullied Sarah or targeted Franklin. You didn't speak up, Franklin said. But you didn't participate either. You're not fired, Marcus. But you're not promoted. You get to choose what happens next, whether you learn from today or repeat it. Marcus nodded slowly, relief and shame mixing on his face. The door opened, and a woman in her 50s entered, carrying a leather briefcase. Ellen Torres, Franklin's regional director, took in the scene with the practiced assessment of someone who'd cleaned up unusual situations before. Sarah, Franklin said, this is Ellen. She's going to walk you through everything. Your new position, your signing bonus, your benefits package. Take all the time you need. Ask every question. This is your life changing, and you deserve to understand exactly how. Sarah wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself, but failing beautifully. She looked at Franklin with an expression of pure disbelief and gratitude. Why me? Why this? Franklin thought of his mother, Helen Jackson, who'd spent 30 years cleaning floors in stores like this one, treated as invisible by people like Joseph Owen. He thought of every person who'd been judged by their appearance, dismissed for their circumstances, denied dignity because someone decided they didn't deserve it. Because someone once told me to find the good ones and lift them up, he said quietly. Welcome to Elite Hours, Sarah. It's yours now. Make it better than it was. Through the boutique's glass windows, the city continued its morning rush. Millions of people making choices about how to treat each other, most of them never realizing those choices were tests. Franklin pulled his torn hoodie a little tighter and walked toward the door. He had 11 more locations to visit, 11 more chances to find someone like Sarah, 11 more opportunities to prove that character mattered more than credentials. His phone buzzed. A text from his lawyer. Please stop getting arrested. The bondsman sent us a Christmas card. Franklin smiled and stepped out into the January morning, just another face in the crowd, invisible by choice. Somewhere in the city, someone was being judged unfairly. Someone was being dismissed, overlooked, treated as less than human because of how they looked or where they came from. And Franklin Jackson, billionaire in rags, was already planning his next test. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as can ever imagine. I'll see you in the next one.